This video is about the 18th variation from Bach's Goldberg variations, and it will be in 3 parts. The first part, I will offer a few suggestions for performing the variation, or at least I will explain my approach to the piece. The second part will be a performance of the left hand only with a score, so you can see the phrasing that I'm using. And then the third part will be a complete live performance of the entire variation. First of all, a few things about the structure of this piece. This piece is structured as a canon in 2 voices. Both of these voices are in the right hand, while the left hand is a little bit more free, although there are some elements that they have in common. I will explain one thing at a time. First of all, the subject of the canon is this. And this is imitated a sixth above with the other voice. So the other voice is up here. And if you put both of them together, it sounds something like this. Notice, by the way, one thing that I wanted to say about the phrasing. Notice that I'm not playing the subject legato. The point here being really trying to emphasize the meter of the piece and making the piece a little more rhythmically active, so to speak. So I don't do... but I separate them, especially to emphasize where every meter begins. The meter, by the way, is cut time, and the half note gets the beat. And this is because the 2 voices actually enter in a space of a half note, so they enter a half note apart. The other thing that I want you to notice about the subject is the fact that on the one hand we have these long notes, but on the other hand we have these faster moving 8th notes. So we have this, and then the 8th notes. And this is very important because the left hand has the exact same kind of rhythmic motive, meaning that we have, while we have lots of steady quarter notes, they're also interspersed with all of these 8th notes. So we have this rhythmic idea of 2 8th notes leading to a longer note, whether this is a half note in terms of the canonic voices, or it's a quarter note in terms of what's happening in the left hand. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the left hand because I really think that it's the left hand here that really animates the texture and really gives the piece its rhythmic profile. And here I think it's very, very important to emphasize the metric identity of the piece, and to do this by, as always, what I say about Baroque music, not interpreting the note values literally, but making sure that the ones that are on the beat receive much more stress. What do I mean by this? Basically, what I try to do is I try to think of course, the 2 beats being the most important and everything in between being less important. But even within that framework, I approach it in 2 different ways. The first is to treat the second beat as slightly less important than the first beat. What this means is that when I have this rhythmic motive of 8th notes leading to quarter notes, and Bach is really nice and for the most part make sure that the 8th notes are in the weak beats and the quarter notes are in the first and second strong beat. What I do when I'm faced with that kind of measure is to make sure that the first of the 2 strong beats is held a little more. Let me give you an example here. When we get to measure 6, what you have in the left hand is something like this. So when I have a measure like this, I keep this note a little more than that one. And this way I make sure that the first beat of the measure is more important than the second beat. Now, the other thing is, of course, not every measure is structured like this. Sometimes we have measures where we have 4 quarter notes. And here what I try to do is something a little different. And I do this basically to provide variety, where I regard the first beat as the most important, and then I kind of start tapering off and keeping each succeeding quarter note a little shorter. So when I have a measure that has 4 quarter notes like this, and then it keeps going, I'm not going to do, but rather, and I like this because it really contrasts with the other kind of measure that has the quarter notes and the eighth notes. So if I play exactly where I played before, I'm going to start and play those 2 measures that have the 4 quarter notes, and this leads to 2 measures that have the mixture of quarter notes and eighth notes. So you get a variety, and it sounds something like this. Etc., etc. So the point here being that on the one hand, I am aware of what I want to emphasize. On the other hand, I want to provide variety in the texture, in the meter of the piece. And this way, I want to animate it as much as I can and bring out its metric identity, but also the different kinds of note values that Bach is using. In other words, I really think here, of course, the canon is very important. This is the structure, the basic structure of the piece. But somehow I really think that this piece comes to life, especially if one really pays attention to the left hand. And this is the reason why in the second part of the video that follows, I'm going to play simply the left hand on its own so that you can see what I'm doing in terms of phrasing. And then, as I mentioned in the third part, you are going to listen to the entire performance of the variation. Keep in mind that, as always, I have an idea in my mind of what I want to do, and I know which beats I want to emphasize, which beats I want to de-emphasize, etc., etc. However, at the moment of the live performance itself, when both hands are interacting with one another, obviously I try not to be strictly literal even with my own approach. So if at the moment of performance I feel like changing something a little bit, I think that's fine. So don't be surprised if you hear what I'm doing with the left hand when I play it on its own, but then you may notice that some things are slightly different. This is part of the live feeling of a performance, which I think is very, very valuable. And it's always nice to introduce surprises, even for the performer, him or herself. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the demonstration with the left hand and then the performance of the entire variation.
Thank